Hello everybody, my name is Allison Harrell with the Fort Bend Museum, and today I'm wearing white gloves, which can only mean one thing. I'm at the Quonset hut. The Quonset hut is the building where the Fort Bend History Association stores all of its collection. So anything that's currently not on exhibit, anything that's currently not on loan, lives here. And especially because our museum building is being renovated right now, a lot more lives here than used to. So we have lots of treasures and different things that we keep here, and we kind of love it. It's like that warehouse at the end of Indiana Jones. But today I'm here to talk about one very specific thing that we happen to have a whole lot of in the Quonset hut, and it's barbed wire. So today we're going to talk all about barbed wire and all about the history of it and why we use it and where it came from and who made it popular and how did it get to Texas. But I came to the Quonset hut to do this video because in our collection we have 63 different pieces of barbed wire. So I thought it'd be a really fun visual to be able to show you the barbed wire that we're talking about. The first thing we need to go over is what makes barbed wire special? Why is barbed wire unique and why is it useful? And so to answer that question, I'm actually going to toss this over to Cody Kalinowski at the George Ranch.
So barbed wire, why do we use it? What's its purpose on a ranch? Well, cattle, you're dealing with a large animal, most of the time up to about 1,200 pounds a pop. These animals, they're pretty curious animals. From time to time, they do a lot of pushing, a lot of shoving. They always try to stretch the boundary of where you have them kind of kept. So the kind of beauty about barbed wire, like its name implies, it's a piece of wire, usually braided and twisted together. From there, you can stretch out these wires along these fence posts here and have a pretty tight strung barrier that can withstand the weight of that 1,200 pound kind of leaning and pushing against it. The beauty of these barbs, however, that kind of pokes and prods on these cattle when they go to kind of pushing up against our fence. It's not designed to really hurt them, but more just to kind of make it uncomfortable for them to kind of be rubbing up against our fence here, that way that they're not just eventually pushing the whole thing over. Now these fences here, they're not invincible. Cattle, they're more than capable of knocking these things over if they felt so inclined. If they just got a full head of steam and ran on straight through, they could knock this whole fence over and tear giant holes in it. But we keep things nice and maintained around here, and we keep them believing that they're trapped in here so they don't feel the need to run through our fence here.
So now that we know why we want barbed wire and why barbed wire is useful, let's talk a little bit about the history of barbed wire. Adding thorns to fences is not a new idea. This is something that has always been shown to deter cows from going through somewhere. Plants like the Osage orange have been used to make natural fences. They have spines on them, and so if you grow a lot of them close together, they will keep animals, especially cows, from going through that area. So the idea of adding a thorn to a fence post is not new, but the way people went about it was always changing, because no one could find a very convenient, easy to manufacture way to add spines to a fence post that would then keep cows from leaving. There were a couple different issues with fencing, especially in the Midwest of the United States, and one of the biggest things was that wood was scarce. So there wasn't a lot of wood, there was a lot of open space, and you had to convince these giant pack animals that they're not allowed to go through there. So, in 1873, a man named Henry Rose gets a patent for a type of fencing. Now, this fencing is an added rail. So his idea was that you would have a wooden rail that was covered in spines that you would add to your already existing fencing. This meant that you didn't have to rebuild your entire fence to make this work. It was an additional piece. So it was a great concept, and he received the patent for it in May of 1873. So, at the DeKalb, Illinois County Fair that year, in 1873, he put his fencing on display. At this particular county fair, something happened. And what happened was that 3 different citizens of DeKalb, Illinois, and they all saw Henry Rose's fence, and they all had the same idea. And the idea was, I bet I could do that better. These 3 citizens of DeKalb, Illinois were Joseph Glidden, Jacob Haish, and Isaac Leonard Elwood. Now, each of them had ended up in DeKalb through various walks of life and various attempts at various jobs, but they all ended up here, and they all had the same idea at the same county fair at the same time. So they all went home, and they all tried their hand at making a new, improved type of fence with barb in it, or on it. Now, the way they went about it was each different and unique, so we're going to talk about each of them in turn. We're going to start with Joseph Glidden. Now, he was born in Charlestown, New Hampshire, but his family soon purchased a family farm in Orleans County, New York, which is where Glidden grew up. Now, as he was growing up, he had the idea that he was going to be a teacher, so he ended up getting educated at the Middlebury Academy of Vermont, and then he went to seminary in Lima, New York, before he got a teaching position. But he really only held this position for a little while, until the call of the family farm was too strong. He ended up going back home to his parents' farm for 8 years, where he worked on the farm and just sort of lived that existence. Now, in the early 1840s, he decided it was time that he buy his own farm. So he got 2 threshers and he started heading west. And as he headed west, he would offer his services to farmers he came across. He could thresh their fields for them. And so this way he made money as he was progressing west. And by 1844, he had gained enough money through all this threshing that he ended up buying 600 acres in DeKalb, Illinois. Now, after the spark of inspiration he received at the fair, he went home and started fiddling around with some pieces and thoughts and ideas that he had. His idea was to add coiled barbs to already existing fencing wire. So he made the coils using the mechanism of an old coffee mill or coffee grinder. He took it apart, reassembled it in order to easily make these coils. Each coil had 2 ends that were cut at an angle, and then they were attached to wire. Now, the mechanism of the coffee mill is really what made it easier for him to create the coils of the right size to fit on the wire without having to painstakingly make them by hand. His first wire had those coiled barbs added to fencing wire, and that was it. He applied for a patent in May of 1874, but he wasn't done yet. So later on that year, around November, he applies for a second patent because he's made an improvement to his wire. So the improvement that Glidden made at this time was to add the second wire, which would then hold the barbs in place. So this keeps your barbs from moving up and down the wire and all sliding to one place. So this keeps the cows from rearranging the barbs to make it not hurt. So the second wire was just coiled around the first, and you can see these coiled barbs that were added to one wire. The second wire is coiled around, and coiling was something that was very easy to produce by machine. So he had created a machine to make the coils and a machine to coil the wires together, making a really easy to market and a really easy to manufacture barbed wire. So he applied for a second patent in November of 1874 for this improved wire from his first design. And this design would later be called the winner. And let's talk about why. The next person we have to talk about is Jacob Haish. Now, this DeKalb resident had done exactly what Glidden did, went to the fair, saw the fencing, thought he could improve it, went home and started trying things out. So by June of 1874, he had applied for 3 separate patents for 3 separate designs of barbed fencing. Now, he didn't receive his patent for his S-bend fencing until November of 1875, and the S-bend fencing looks like this. So you can see the wire is coiled around the the barbs are coiled around the main 2 fencing pieces, but they are not coiled, they are actually woven through. So if you look right here, you can kind of see the S-bend curve of the barbed portions that go around the wire. So this was his version of barbed wire. This is how he thought barbed wire should be made. The next step that Jacob Haish took in order to make his barbed wire the best barbed wire was a kind of unique one. He sued the other 2 residents of DeKalb that were making barbed wire. So as soon as he got his patent, he basically said, they're infringing on my patent, I think they should not be allowed to make this. And he ended up taking that case all the way to the Supreme Court. So in 1895 is when the Supreme Court finally said, no, they're not infringing on your patent, it's not the same thing, you can't do this. And that sort of stalled Jacob Haish's barbed wire enterprise before it even got off the ground. Rather than marketing his wire or finding ways to manufacture it easily, he ended up just attacking the other people that had made barbed wire, which is a strategy, but not one that worked for him. The third individual that was at that county fair that day was Isaac Leonard Elwood, and his reaction to this entire situation was incredibly unique. So, he does the same thing the other two did, went to the fair, saw the barbed fencing, went home, decided to improve it, made his own version of fencing, but then he did something different. So as soon as Elwood saw Glidden's design and Glidden's way of manufacturing this barbed wire, he gave up. He said, you know what? That is far better than my design. Let me help you. So when Glidden came to Elwood and said, hey, would you like to buy half of the interest in this device and help me manufacture it? Elwood said yes. So Elwood put in the $295 that was asked of him. The two men started to manufacture the barbed wire, and very quickly they had a ton of orders because there was a ton of need and a ton of desire for a product like this. So everyone in the area was coming to them for their barbed wire. Now, at this point in the game, Glidden sells out. So Glidden decides that, you know what? I don't really want to be in the forefront of invention. I just want to have my farm. So he ends up selling his interest, his 50% interest in this concept and manufacturing and technique, to the Washburn and Moen Manufacturing Company from Worcester, Massachusetts for $60,000 in 1880. Glidden basically goes back home to his farm, where he ends up just living off his farm and the money that he made from barbed wire. Now he did, with his deal of selling the company, he did add in that he would get royalties, and he collected royalties from barbed wire until 1901. So he did really well for himself in this venture. He did a really good thing, and then he just went home and enjoyed the rest of his life. Now, this is all, while the story is really fascinating, it doesn't actually explain how barbed wire got to Texas. Because if you notice, everything that has occurred so far has occurred in DeKalb, Illinois. If you've ever looked at a map, Illinois is nowhere near Texas. So we need to actually bring in another player to this game to explain how barbed wire got to Texas and how people decided it was useful. So, enter John Warren Gates. He is sometimes known as Bet-A-Million Gates. He was an industrialist and a gambler at the turn of the century. So he was hired by Isaac Leonard Elwood to be a salesperson. So at this point, Isaac Leonard Elwood and the Moen and Washburn Company are competing. They both have the same concept, they both have full rights to manufacture it, and they're both trying to outdo the other one in terms of distribution. So Elwood hires Gates as a salesman and assigns him the zone of Texas. And so Gates goes to Texas, and he finds that while everyone is really enjoying playing poker with him, none of them want this newfangled fencing. So Gates does something amazing. He stages a demonstration because he decides, you know what, let's show him how it works. So he ends up setting up a pen in the middle of Military Plaza of San Antonio. So in the heart of San Antonio, he sets up a pen and he herds cows in. And at this point, people are gathering from a safe distance because they're very certain this is going to fail in a spectacular fashion. So they're all watching. And Gates herds the cows in, closes the pen, and steps back. And the barbed wire holds. The cows don't go stampeding through the streets of San Antonio. No one is trampled, nothing is damaged, and all the people that were present that day were impressed. This fencing could actually hold in a Texas Longhorn. So now that we know how barbed wire was manufactured and who made it popular and how it ended up coming to Texas, let's go back to Cody to find out how fences changed the way that Texas ranches.
So fences, they haven't always been around ranches here in the United States. The Spaniards, they believed in a free-ranging, free-grazing process, so all their cattle are kept on an open prairie with no boundaries, no borders. Only thing keeping those cattle in line or in a herd were the vaqueros themselves. Now later on, with the completion of the railroads and with the purchase and acquisition of a lot of private land, some ranchers decided to start to kind of fence off some of their portions of their land to kind of secure their resources, their grass, their water for themselves, rather than sharing it with the public and whoever wants to graze their cattle across their land. So that dynamic, it shrunk the availability of land greatly by people fencing off larger portions of land for their own uses. The access to the ranching industry, to the beef industry, was greatly reduced because of so. But in turn, they have been able to raise higher quality, better raised beef in turn with the acquisition of their own private land. In turn, with less folks using land to their own needs, to their own beliefs, we have been able to better institute better agriculture and better grazing processes. That way there isn't everybody across the area here overgrazing our pastures for the benefit of their herd and their herd only. So that way, with the division and sectioning off of land, we've been able to kind of better keep an eye on and better monitor some different stages of growth in our grass and some different availability of water and such.
I hope you enjoyed today's video all about barbed wire, and I hope you enjoyed learning about how this simple little wire changed the landscape of how Texas raised cows, what kind of cows they could raise, and also how they treated land. So just 2 strands of wire and some barbs, and it created a lot of drama in its creation and manufacturing, and then it also created a lot of drama when it was being promoted. So hard to know that there'd be so much drama over a little piece of wire, but it did change the landscape of Texas. See you next time. If you want to learn more about the Quonset hut, what we keep here, who works here, and what we do with the collection, you can actually head on over to our YouTube channel where we have a behind-the-scenes tour of the Quonset hut with our curator, Chris Godbold.